The monitor beside my bed at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta beat steady and slow, like a metronome counting down something I wasn't ready to face. I'd been lying there for 3 days, wearing one of those thin gowns that don't cover anything worth covering, watching the ceiling tiles and pretending to sleep whenever a nurse walked in. Then my phone lit up. Instagram notification. My grandson Deshaun's wife, Gabrielle, had just posted a photo. My hand started trembling the moment I tapped it open, and not because of my heart. There she was, turquoise water stretching behind her like something out of a travel magazine. Aruba, a frozen cocktail in one hand, and her other arm wrapped around some man I had never seen in my life. Fitted linen shirt, expensive watch, a smile that had no business being that relaxed. The caption read, "Living in my truth. Sometimes healing means letting go and choosing yourself. No regrets. Nothing but blessings." I had been admitted to that hospital 3 days ago. My cardiologist, Dr. Reeves, had pulled Deshaun aside and spoken to him in that low, careful voice doctors use when the news isn't good. Grim prognosis. Could be hours. Could be a few days. Deshaun had stepped outside the room and called Gabrielle immediately, voice breaking, telling her she needed to come home to Atlanta. Now, she said she was in Chicago. A major commercial real estate deal, closing on a portfolio of properties, the kind of deal that doesn't wait for anyone's grandfather to get better. She promised to fly in the moment it was done. She sent a beautiful arrangement of white lily to the room. She posted a heartfelt story on her Instagram about how devastating it was to be away from family during moments like these. How much she loved Deshaun. How she was fighting to get back. But she wasn't in Chicago, closing any deal. She was in Aruba with another man, while her husband sat in the hospital cafeteria downstairs, eating a vending machine sandwich and terrifying himself with every worst-case scenario a mind can build. My nurse, a sharp woman named Diane, came in to check my vitals. She took one look at my face and frowned. "Mr. Washington, your blood pressure just jumped. Are you in pain?" "No," I said. "Just angry." "Anger's not good for your heart, sir. Try to breathe through it." She adjusted something on my 4-line and left. I didn't breathe through it. 20 minutes later, a text came in from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Washington, don't say anything to Deshaun about Gabrielle's location. Meet me at your Lake Lanier property tomorrow morning. Come alone. This is about your grandson's life." I read that message 4 times. The Lake Lanier property. A lakefront cabin I'd owned for over 30 years, sitting on the quiet north end of the lake, about an hour outside Atlanta. I'd bought it when I was still running my construction company, back when business was good, and I believed in rewarding the people who worked hard. My wife, Dorothy, and I had spent nearly every summer weekend up there. After she passed 11 years ago, I'd kept it because selling it felt like erasing her. Deshaun and I fished off that dock. We grilled. We sat in silence and watched the water like it owed us something. Nobody outside of family knew about that cabin. Not colleagues. Not neighbors. Nobody. I stared at the water-stained ceiling for a long moment. Then I pressed the call button. Diane returned. "What do you need, Mr. Washington?" "I need to check myself out." "Sir, Dr. Reeves hasn't cleared you. I'm leaving Emma. Against medical advice. Get me whatever I need to sign." She looked at me the way women do when they've already decided you're being a fool, but they respect your right to be one. "I'll get the paperwork. Here's the truth I need you to understand before this story goes any further. I was never dying. Not really. 2 weeks before I checked myself in, I had stopped by Deshaun's townhouse in Buckhead unannounced. He was at work. I had a key, had always had a key, ever since I helped him with the down payment. I went to drop off documents for my estate planning, a process his financial advisor said needed his signature. That's when I found the folder. It was sitting in Gabrielle's home office, the room she used for her real estate business. A manila folder with Peachtree Capital Development Group printed on the tab in clean block letters. Inside that folder, my blood stopped moving. The development project in Alpharetta, the one Deshawn had asked to borrow $180,000 for 8 months ago. The one with the incredible projected returns didn't exist. The company didn't exist. Gabrielle had fabricated the entire thing. Fake incorporation papers, fake architectural renderings, fake prospectus documents. My $180,000 had been wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands within 72 hours of the transfer. But that wasn't what kept me awake at night. The life insurance policy was what did. That $5 million on Deshawn's life. Gabrielle listed as the sole beneficiary. Taken out 7 months ago. Deshawn's signature on the application, forged cleanly with the kind of confidence that comes from practice. The premiums paid from an account I didn't recognize. An account that, when I traced it back later, connected directly to the fake development fund. I photographed every single page, put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, drove home, and started planning. The hospital admission was deliberate. I needed to create a controlled crisis, needed to watch how Gabrielle responded when she thought I was dying, when she believed the man who knew Deshawn's finances best might not be around to ask questions. Would she rush back? Would she hold her husband together? Or would she see opportunity? She saw opportunity. The Instagram post was all the answer I needed. I checked myself out at 7 that evening. Deshawn wanted to drive me home. I told him I was fine, that hospitals made me claustrophobic, that I'd call him in the morning. The look of relief on his face when I said I was feeling better, that look nearly undid me completely. He had no idea. None. My truck, a 2019 F-150 dark blue, well worn, took me north on I-985 as the October sky turned the color of old iron. I passed through Gainesville, then turned off toward the cabin. The trees were stripped bare, red clay shoulders on the narrow roads. The whole world looked like it was bracing for something. When I turned onto the private drive, there was already a car parked outside. A silver Nissan Altima. Georgia plates. I sat in the truck for a moment. What if this is Elena? No, Gabrielle. What if Gabrielle had found out I'd been to the townhouse? What if this was a way of getting rid of the one person who could unravel everything she'd built? But I'd come this far. I got out. The air smelled like pine and lake water, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists far enough from the city. Before I reached the porch, the door opened. A woman stood there. Late 20s, maybe 30. Natural hair, pulled back. She was wearing a Morehouse sweatshirt and holding a ceramic mug like she'd been waiting for me a while. Her face was familiar in the way faces are when you've seen them in the background of someone else's photos. "Mr. Washington," she said, "thank you for making the drive. I know this was a lot to ask." Her voice was measured, the kind of calm that comes from crying everything out already. My name is Keisha Monroe. I was engaged to Terrell Briggs. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Terrell Briggs. I knew that name. Deshawn had mentioned him, a colleague at his wealth management firm, Cornerstone Capital on Peachtree. They'd worked together on client accounts. Young guy, sharp, going places. Was engaged. He died 4 months ago, I said. Yes. Her jaw tightened, just barely. His car went off the overpass on I-285 near Camp Creek. Single vehicle accident. The official finding was brake failure and driver error. She looked at me directly. But it wasn't an accident. Mr. Washington. Gabrielle had him killed. The porch shifted under my feet. "You'd better come inside," I said. "And you'd better start from the beginning." The cabin smelled like cedar and old coffee and every good memory I had left. Kaisha had already made a fresh pot. She'd found the tin on the same shelf. Dorothy had always kept it, which told me she'd been here long enough to look around. I didn't ask how she'd gotten in. The spare key had been under the same flat rock near the back steps for 25 years. Some things you never think to change. We sat at the kitchen table. Dorothy's table. The one with the burn mark near the edge from a candle she'd knocked over the summer of 2003 and laughed about for years afterward. I wrapped both hands around my mug and looked at this young woman who had driven up here alone with the dead man's evidence and decided to trust a stranger. That took courage. Women like her don't get enough credit for that kind of courage. "Start from the beginning," I said. She opened her laptop. Terrell worked with Deshawn at Cornerstone Capital. They shared a client base, mostly older investors, retirees, people who'd spent their whole lives building something and needed someone trustworthy to protect it. She paused on that word, trustworthy. About 14 months ago, Gabrielle approached Terrell privately, said she needed help structuring offshore accounts for her real estate business. Legitimate tax planning, she told him. Terrell knew the rules. He helped her set up accounts in the Caymans, all legal, all properly documented. She turned the laptop so I could see the screen. Bank records, account numbers, transfer histories. But Gabrielle didn't use those accounts for tax planning. She used them to run an investment fraud operation. She was targeting clients through Cornerstone, mostly older black men and women, Mr. Washington. People who trusted the firm because Deshawn worked there. People who trusted Deshawn because of his reputation. She'd approach them personally, charm them, pitch fake development projects through her real estate connections. The money would come in, get moved offshore within days, and disappear. My jaw tightened. How many people? Terrell documented 9 victims. The total losses were over $1.6 million. She scrolled to a new file. The youngest victim was 61. The oldest was 84. A retired schoolteacher named Miss Evelyn Hartwell lost her entire retirement savings. Every dollar she had outside of Social Security. I sat with that for a moment. Let it settle into me fully. Older black folks who had worked their whole lives, who had trusted someone in their community, who had no way of knowing they were being hunted. When did Terrell figure it out? About 6 months ago. He started noticing patterns in some of the account activity, transfers that didn't match the investment timelines Gabrielle had documented. He confronted her once, quietly, said he thought there might be some compliance issues. She acted confused, cooperative, said she'd look into it. Kaisha's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. 2 weeks later, she had his brakes cut. You're certain it was her. Terrell was certain enough to hide everything he'd found. She reached into her bag and set a small external hard drive on the table between us. He was thorough, Mr. Washington. He documented the fraud, every transfer, every victim, every forged contract. But he'd also found something else. She navigated to a folder on her screen and turned it toward me again. The life insurance policy on Deshawn. $5 million. Gabrielle as sole beneficiary. Forged signature. I'd seen it before in that manila folder in Buckhead, but seeing it here, laid out alongside everything else Terrell had assembled, made it feel different. More real, more urgent. There's more, Kaisha said. Terrell found an email chain between Gabrielle and a man named Calvin Reese. Goes back almost 2 years. She pulled it up. Calvin is her ex from Charlotte. He moved to Atlanta 8 months ago. Runs a mobile auto repair service now, The kind where he goes to your car wherever it's parked. Office buildings, apartment garages, wherever. I read the emails slowly. Timeline needs to feel natural. Nothing rushed. The break line method worked before. Cleaner than it looks. Once the old man's gone, Deshawn has no one watching the accounts. I set the laptop down. He's already scoping Deshawn's building, Kaisha said quietly. I've been watching Calvin for 6 weeks. He's been at the parking deck at Cornerstone Capital 3 times in the past month. Asking security about camera positions. He's preparing, yes. I stood and walked to the window. The lake was out there in the dark, invisible but present, the way certain truths are before you're ready to face them. Dorothy had always said that still water was the most honest thing in nature. It just reflects back whatever's standing in front of it. I'd been standing in front of this truth for 2 weeks. I just hadn't known all of it yet. Why didn't you go to Atlanta PD? I asked. Terrell tried. Before he died, he made 2 calls to the fraud division at a PD. Both times he was told the case didn't have enough documentation to open a formal investigation. She folded her hands on the table. After he died, I did some digging into why those calls went nowhere. Terrell had noted in his files that he suspected someone in the department might be compromised. He'd flagged a detective named Ray Duckworth in the financial crimes unit. I verified it. Duckworth bought a lake house in Dalanada 14 months ago. Cash purchase. His salary doesn't come close to explaining it. So we go over his head. That's why I needed you. I turned from the window. What do you mean? You've been in Atlanta construction for 40 years, Mr. Washington. You've worked with state agencies, federal contractors, oversight boards. You know people I don't have access to. People who are clean. She met my eyes without flinching. I found the evidence. I kept it safe. I drove up here alone, and I laid everything on this table. But I can't finish this without someone. Who has the relationships to bring in the right authorities? Someone Gabrielle would never expect to see. Coming. I looked at her for a long moment. She'd done everything right. She'd grieved and kept moving. She'd protected the evidence when she had every reason to fall apart. She'd tracked Calvin Reese for 6 weeks on her own, quietly, carefully, without tipping anyone off. She had done the hardest part of this alone, and now she was asking for backup, not rescue. There's a difference, and it matters. I know someone at the GBI, I said. Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Organized Crime and Financial Fraud Division. Man named Walter Odom. We served on a state contractor oversight board together about 15 years ago. Straight as they come. Can you trust him completely? With my grandson's life. I picked up my phone. It was past 10 at night, but Walter Odom answered on the second ring. I told him I had evidence of a major fraud and murder conspiracy involving a sitting APD detective. I told him it was urgent and personal. He told me to meet him at 7 the next morning at a Waffle House off I-75 in Marietta. Neutralground.keisha, and I spent the next 2 hours going through every file on Terrell's hard drive. The more I saw, the colder I felt, not with fear, but with the particular clarity that comes when something complicated suddenly becomes simple. Gabrielle had targeted Deshawn the way a professional targets a mark, methodically, patiently. She and Calvin had been looking for someone exactly like him, successful, trusting, devoted to family, with a grandfather who had money and no reason to suspect the woman his grandson loved. They had done this before. The emails made that clear. The break line method worked before. Those words sat in my chest like a splinter. She married him to kill him, I said. Yes. Kaisha's voice didn't waver. She'd had months to make peace with the shape of this evil. And she had Terrell killed because he was the only person who could prove it. Around midnight, I called Deshawn. He answered immediately. He never slept well when things were unsettled. Had been that way since he was a boy. Grandpa, you okay? I'm fine. But I need you to do something for me. And I need you to do it without asking me why. Not yet. A pause. Okay. I need you to call your manager tomorrow morning and tell him you need to handle the Savannah pension account in person. Book a room at the Marriott on the river. Use cash if you can. Don't tell Gabrielle where you're staying. Another pause, longer this time. Grandpa, what did you find? I'll tell you everything in a week. Right now, I just need you somewhere safe. His voice dropped. This is about the money I borrowed from you, isn't it? The Alpharetta development. Yes, I heard him breathe. The project stopped communicating with me 2 months ago. Gabrielle kept saying it was delays. I told myself she knew what she was doing. A pause that carried the weight of a man realizing he's been lied to by someone he loved. I should have listened to my gut. You listened to your heart. That's not the same thing as being foolish. He left for Savannah before sunrise. Walter Odom hadn't changed much in 15 years. Still broad-shouldered, still wore the same kind of plain dark jacket that said, "I don't need to impress you." He was already in the booth when I walked into that Waffle House in Marietta, coffee in front of him, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He stood when he saw me, shook my hand with both of his the way men do when the greeting means something. We sat down. I laid everything on the table, Terrell's hard drive, the photographs I'd taken in Gabrielle's home office, the insurance policy, the emails between Gabrielle and Calvin Reese. I told him about Detective Duckworth and the cash purchase in Dahlonega. I told him about Keisha Monroe sitting alone in a Morehouse sweatshirt at my cabin, protecting a dead man's evidence for 4 months because she didn't know who else to trust. Walter read through everything slowly. He didn't rush, didn't react dramatically. Just read, turned pages, read some more. When he finally set the last document down, he took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Raymond, he said. He'd always called me by my first name. If this holds up, and from what I'm seeing it will, we're talking about murder one, conspiracy, wire fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, and a sitting APD detective on a foreign payroll. He looked at me steadily. This is going to be loud. I need it loud, I said. I need it loud enough that nobody can bury it. He nodded slowly. We'll need proper warrants. Phone surveillance on both Gabrielle and Calvin Reese. Physical surveillance on Reese, if he's already scoping Deshawn's parking deck or working against a clock. Coordination with GBI financial crimes, and probably FBI white collar, given the offshore accounts. He paused. And Raymond, you're a civilian in this. Personally involved. That means you step back and let us work. I understand. I need to hear you say it, like you mean it. Walter. I checked myself into a hospital for 3 days and pretended to be dying to gather information. I think I've earned some trust here. He almost smiled. Give me 5 days. Those 5 days were the longest of my life. I went back to Atlanta, played the role of a recovering grandfather, called Deshawn every evening, kept the conversations light, told him I was resting. Gabrielle had returned from Aruba, tanned and relaxed, posting photos of herself back in the city, tagging Atlanta restaurants, performing the role of devoted wife for anyone who cared to watch. She visited Deshawn's empty townhouse twice while he was in Savannah. Walter's surveillance team was on her both times. On day 3, Walter called me with news that tightened something in my chest. Calvin Reese had accessed the parking deck at Deshawn's building using a fake maintenance credential. He'd spent 40 minutes in the garage. They'd pulled footage. He'd located Deshawn's Honda Accord and spent time near the rear of the vehicle. We can't wait the full 5 days, Walter said. We move tomorrow morning. What's the plan? Simultaneous arrests. Gabrielle at her real estate office on Peachtree. Reese at his garage in East Atlanta. We freeze the offshore accounts the moment the cuffs go on. Coordinate with GBI Financial Crimes and CBSA. Duckworth gets picked up at a PD, headquarters by Internal Affairs and 2 of my people. Nobody gets a warning. Nobody gets a phone call first. I was quiet for a moment. And Deshaun? Keep him in Savannah until I call you personally. Don't let him come back to Atlanta until it's done. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the old couch in the cabin's back room and stared at the ceiling and thought about Dorothy. She had been the kind of woman who believed in doing things the right way, even when the wrong way was faster. Especially then. She used to say that revenge is just pain wearing a disguise. But justice, real justice, is the thing that actually heals. Okay, Dorothy, I thought. We're doing it your way. At 9 the next morning, I was sitting in an unmarked GBI vehicle parked on Peachtree Street, half a block from Gabrielle's Century 21 office. Walter was in the seat beside me. Neither of us spoke much. At 9:02, 6 GBI agents entered the building. I watched through the windshield as they brought her out. 4 minutes later, Gabrielle was in a white blazer. Hair done. Heels. She looked like she was dressed for a closing. She was screaming, not crying, screaming about harassment and wrongful arrest and her attorney's name, which she repeated 3 times like a spell that might work if she said it loud enough. Her face cycled through outrage, and then, when she saw the number of agents and the cameras on the street and understood this wasn't a conversation she could charm her way out of. Something else moved across her expression. Not remorse. Not fear exactly. Calculation. Even then, still calculating. Across town, Calvin Reese tried to run. Made it through the back door of his garage and across a vacant lot before a GBI tactical unit brought him down in the parking lot of a Family Dollar on Glenwood Avenue. In his garage, they found brake line diagrams, purchase receipts for specialized tools, a handwritten timeline with Deshaun's name on it, and 3 different methods listed in order of preference. In a storage unit Reese had been renting in Decatur, they found the vehicle he'd used in Terrell's death, a panel van with modifications that shouldn't exist on a legitimate mechanic's vehicle. They also found Terrell's car. The brake lines had been cut and repatched to simulate natural wear. It was the kind of work that would fool a standard investigation, the kind of work that had already fooled one dot at APD headquarters. Detective Ray Duckworth was arrested at his own desk. He said nothing, just looked at the floor at the station when Gabrielle was shown the full scope of the evidence, the emails, the offshore records, the insurance policy, the surveillance footage, Terrell's complete documentation. She tried to pivot, blamed Calvin Reese for everything, sighed she'd been manipulated, said she was a victim of a controlling ex-boyfriend who had inserted himself into her life and used her business accounts without her knowledge. The emails didn't support that story. Neither did the 2 years of coordinated planning. Neither did the life insurance policy she'd taken out in her own name with a forged signature. Walter called me at 11:47 that morning. It's done, Raymond. Call your grandson. The trial lasted 9 months. Deshaun had to sit in that courtroom and watch video depositions of Gabrielle discussing, in her own calm voice, the most efficient way to make his death look accidental. He had to hear emails read aloud in which she referred to him as the account and the asset. He had to learn, in public, in front of strangers, that the woman he had loved and married and built a life with had selected him the way a contractor selects a job based on projected return. I watched him absorb all of it, watched him hold himself together when lesser men would have shattered. He never missed a day, never looked away from the evidence. There is a specific kind of strength that only reveals itself under that kind of weight, and my grandson had it in full. Keisha Monroe sat in the front row every single day of that trial. She wore a small photograph of Terrell pinned to her jacket, a photo from a fishing trip, him laughing at something off camera. When the verdicts were read, she was the only person in that courtroom who didn't make a sound. She just closed her eyes for a long moment, then opened them and straightened her shoulders, and exhaled. She had carried this the longest. She deserved that exhale more than anyone. Gabrielle received life without parole eligibility for 25 years. Murder in the first degree for Terrell Briggs. Attempted murder of Deshaun Washington. 9 counts of wire fraud and investment fraud. The judge, before sentencing, said he had rarely seen a case that combined such sophisticated financial predation with such complete absence of human conscience. Calvin Reese received 22 years for murder and conspiracy. Detective Ray Duckworth received 14 years for corruption, obstruction of justice, and accessory after the fact. The offshore accounts were frozen and liquidated. Miss Evelyn Hartwell, the retired schoolteacher who had lost everything, received a full recovery of her funds. So did every other victim. It didn't return what had been taken from them beyond money. But it was real, and it was right, and it mattered. That summer, Deshaun and I went back to Lake Lanier. The water was high and blue, and completely unbothered by anything that had happened over the past year. We sat on the dock with cold drinks, watching a family of geese work their way along the far bank. The late afternoon light came across the water the way it always had, slow and gold and generous. I should have seen it, Deshaun said. You loved someone, I said. That's not a character flaw. All the signs were there. Signs are easier to read in retrospect. She was a professional, Deshaun. This was her work. You weren't the first person she deceived, and you need to stop carrying that like it says something about you, because it doesn't. He was quiet for a while. A hawk turned lazy circles above the tree line across the water. The $180,000, he said. I'm paying every dollar back. I know you will. But that's not what I think about when I think about this. What do you think about? I think about you sitting in that courtroom for 9 months and never once looking away. I think about Keisha Monroe driving up to my cabin alone with a hard drive and enough courage to trust a stranger. I think about Terrell Briggs, who tried to do the right thing and paid for it, and how his work is what ultimately saved your life. I looked at him. I think about the people who fought for you. That's what I think about. He nodded slowly. The geese had reached the dock now, circling without urgency. Grandpa, when you checked yourself in, you weren't actually sick, were you? It wasn't quite a question. I needed to see what she'd do, I said. I'd found the papers. I knew something was wrong, but I needed to understand the shape of it. And when she posted that photo from Aruba while you were sitting in a hospital cafeteria eating a bad sandwich and thinking your grandfather was dying, I paused. That told me everything I needed to know about the shape of her. Deshaun laughed. Not a happy sound exactly, but a real one. The kind that comes after something hard is finally, genuinely over. I'm selling the townhouse, he said. Too much of her in the walls. Good. You'll find somewhere better. We sat until the sun dropped behind the tree line, and the water went from gold to gray to the deep, quiet blue of early evening. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called out, the same sound Dorothy had loved above all others. That long, mournful note that somehow never feels sad, just true. I thought about Keisha Monroe, who had fought for justice with nothing but a hard drive and her own determination. I thought about Miss Evelyn Hartwell, who had lost everything and then, slowly, got it back. I thought about Dorothy, who had always believed that the right thing and the hard thing were usually the same thing. And that doing it anyway was the only definition of character that held up under pressure. We got there, Dorothy. We got there. Deshawn stood up and stretched. Tomorrow, fishing. Early. Propane stove coffee first. Obviously. He went inside. Through the cabin window, I could see the warm light of the kitchen, the old table with the burn mark, the tin of coffee on the shelf where it had always been. Everything that mattered in my life had passed through that room at some point. I stayed on the dock alone a little longer. The stars were coming out over Lake Lanier, clear and unhurried, the way they only appear when you're far enough from everything that drowns them out. I looked up at them and felt the particular piece of a man who did what needed doing and brought his family home intact. Evil had walked into our lives, wearing a beautiful face and a convincing story. It had been patient and calculating and very nearly won. But it hadn't counted on the people who loved Deshawn Washington. It hadn't counted on a young woman named Keisha Monroe who refused to let her fiance's death mean nothing. It hadn't counted on a retired grandfather who knew how to be still and watch, and wait until the moment was exactly right. And it had not counted on the truth, which has a way, when handled carefully and with enough patience, of surviving everything thrown against it. I walked back up to the cabin. Tomorrow we'd fish. Tonight. That was enough, Dot. Thank you for being here and letting me share my story. If it touched you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me what city and state you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are. If you want to support me even more, there's a donation link in the description. I share real-life stories like this every single day, Dot, and now 2 of my most popular videos will appear on your screen. Choose whichever one calls to you. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over just because someone tried to write the ending without you.